telling us more about the European State of the Union speech and why it's important.
Well, this State of the European Union speech has actually been a requirement since it was imposed by the Lisbon Treaty, which was about 10 years ago. It was the last round of EU constitutional reform, and it's basically meant as the same thing as its US counterpart. The president briefs the lawmakers about their intentions for the coming year, and the idea is to give lawmakers kind of a heads up and to make sure that everybody is involved in the process. It is, of course, also an opportunity to project that agenda to the public. As in the US, of course, the president will also want to reflect on the past year, highlight successes, and put spin on failures. So over the past year, obviously, our lives have still been dominated by the pandemic. So in a lot of ways, this State of the Union will be similar to the State of the Union she gave in September 2020, which was her first, which means all of her State of the European Union addresses have really been dominated by COVID. But she does have a good news story on that front, because Europe is now the most vaccinated area in the world because of the EU's very successful vaccination campaign. And I think she's going to be keen to kind of reset the narrative about that, because there were stumbles in the early weeks of the vaccination campaign at the beginning of this year in terms of supply. And I think in the minds of many, that narrative has stuck around. So she's going to want to highlight the figures here, which is chiefly, I think the chief figure that she's going to want to hit is now the EU is more than 70% fully vaccinated for adults. But there are many other themes that she is expected to highlight here. The other three main themes that she's going to stress in this speech are digitalization, so the need for Europe to get more on page with the 21st century and to embrace the digital revolution. That is a big priority of her commission. Then also climate change, the other big priority of her commission. And finally, she's going to want to talk about the economic recovery from COVID. And on that front, she will talk about the progress of the EU's recovery fund. This was this mammoth 1.7 trillion budget that was agreed last year and is now being implemented slowly but surely. This is the first time ever that the Commission has been given the authority to issue what are effectively Euro bonds. The Commission is borrowing on the international markets using the credit of all EU countries. That's never been done before. There's a lot of anxiety about that in Northern Europe. So I think she's going to want to reassure people that the recovery fund is being spent and talk about the economic growth that's resulted so far from that boost.
Dave, you also mentioned climate change. What are we expecting Ursula von der Leyen to say on that front?
Well, I'm told for sure she's going to highlight the extreme weather events in Europe this summer, the cold, rain and floods in Northern Europe, the heat, droughts, and wildfires in Southern Europe, and say this is the consequences of climate change. She's going to really explicitly link those things, and she's going to say this summer Europeans felt the impacts of climate change in a way that was much more personal than they have before. Now she's going to say that this means that lawmakers should quickly pass the ambitious proposals she put forward in July. Actually, the floods that had here in Northwest Europe came just days after she put forward this Fit for 55 proposal, which is drastically updating the EU's climate legislation to get to its newly revised target of a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. There is an audience there that is skeptical, which includes her own party. She is from the center-right European People's Party. There are many people in that party, particularly in Europe's east, that are very skeptical about more ambitious climate change. But of course, she's also going to be talking to the national governments. I mean, her address is to the European Parliament, but when it comes to the most skeptical body about climate change, it's the other house of the legislature, the Council, which is made up of national governments, that she really needs to convince. And this speech, especially when it comes to climate, will be to them as much as it is to the parliamentarians sitting there in the room in Strasbourg. So she has a lot of convincing here to do. This is a big package of complicated legislation. The legislative process is starting now. It's going to take many months to pass all of these things, but she wants lawmakers to pass the version of the proposal that the Commission put forward in July.
All right, Dave Keating in Brussels, thank you very much for that preview of